Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli here. Welcome out in the shop with a brand new video for you today. And in today's shop video, we're talking about a little secret, a little niche technique of fishing a jig that will 100% catch you more bass, especially if you live in a place that's deep, clear, a little bit of current, something like that. This is a technique you're going to want to know about. And in today's shop video, we're going to be talking about this little piece of jig fishing. Guys want to keep it quiet, but I'm going to break it open. Called Micro Football Jig Fishing. Micro football jigs, okay? So this is really something that developed maybe, call it five, 6, 7 years ago, where we're utilizing the basics of a football jig, but scaling everything down to make a lure that's hard to get snagged and easy for the fish to eat. So if you're a fan of jig fishing, this is something that you want to know about, okay? Once again, I mentioned it before, but specifically when we're going to switch to this technique, when we're going to put down our regular football jigs and switch to these little micro football jigs, is when we have clean, clear, ultra clear water, when we have current in the water, whether it's a river or a stream or even reservoir current. And last but not least, when we have a lot of fishing pressure, this is going to be a jig that you want to have tied on. If you're watching this and you live in a place that have smallmouth bass or spotted bass, this is going to be a real killer in your arsenal, okay? So let's start out with the jig, and I want to make sure I can really explain this for you guys, okay? I want to get a full-sized football jig here in a second. I'll find one, but this is a ultra small and compact scaled-down version of a regular football jig, okay? So on these micro footballs, when you look at the head, it looks like a football, right? Like legitimately they call football head jigs because they look like footballs. So on these micro football jigs, we've got really broad shoulders on each side, right? So that head is really broad left and right. And that's going to allow this bait to crawl, okay? I've got a full-size jig here that I'm going to show you. And here's a full-sized Missile Jigs headbanger. Same football style head. And here's our micro football, okay? So the jig head is the same, but the main difference lies in the size and the components, okay? So check this out. Regular football jig, micro football jig. Dude, that's like day and night, right? That's like day and night. So when you have clean water, when you have a lot of fishing pressure, and when you have small bait, small crawls, some places you fish, the crawls aren't that big. When you have little forage, another great time to switch to this, okay? So a micro football is a compact mini version of a regular football jig. All right? By the way, this one is the Missile Jigs Micro Football Jig. They come 2 to a pack, okay? And I want to tell you just a little bit about this jig is that it has a 90-degree line tie. It doesn't have a 60. It's not in line. It has a up and down, straight up and down 90-degree line tie, okay? That's really going to help this bait sit correctly on the bottom. It's going to help it sit true, right? And we want it to be true in the water. The other thing that the Micro Football Jig has, and this is the missile, but a lot of them have it. If you look at that hook, it's not extra heavy. It's not the heavy gauge flipping hook. It's not the heavy duty football jig hook. It's a medium gauge wire, right? So it's going to take a lot less force to catch these fish when they bite it. Remember, tough fishing, clear water, fish that are just nipping at it. We're going to catch a lot more because of the lighter wire hook on these Micro Football jigs, okay? And then last but not least on this missile Micro Football is that it comes 2 jigs to a pack with 2 weed guards that give you the option to add a weed guard or leave it out, okay? And I'm going to show you one with and one without, okay? Here's a 3/8 green pumpkin missile Micro Football with a weed guard, and here's one without. So the reason why, and even if you have a different company and they have the weed guards already built in them, here's your rationale for using one or cutting it out, okay? If I'm fishing this Micro Football in places that have moderate to heavy cover, it could be sticks on the bottom, it could be vegetation, it could be big boulders where you're getting snagged a lot, I use the weed guard, and that weed guard helps me get it through those snags. But guys, if you're fishing a place, and a lot of this Micro Football jig fishing happens in more sparse cover, open water scenarios. Thousand Islands, Oneida, Lake Champlain, Kerr Reservoir, Lake Murray, places that don't have a ton of cover. You're on a long point, you're on a bar, you're on a hump, and there's just a little gravel or some chunk rock or, hard scrabble rock. Don't use it. Don't use the guard. You don't need it, and it's going to increase your hookup percentage. If you want the guard, guys, here's all I do. Super easy. Just use a little bit of super glue, dip it in the thin end of the guard, and these jigs come with the hole there. So put a little super glue on the end, push it in the hole, and now you've got a weedless version, okay? So weedless, non-weedless, size and color on the Micro Footballs, exactly the colors that you're fishing now on your football jigs. Honestly, guys, the green pumpkin shades, the watermelon shades, the natural colors, black and blue, of course, peanut butter and jelly, right? It's a small little compact finesse football, so don't go crazy on the colors. Make it look natural. And then on size, honestly, you can find these probably from jigs an 1/8 ounce up to a half. But for micro jig fishing, I'm using a 1/4 ounce and a 3/8 ounce football jig. Micro Football. These are the 2 sizes I'm using. And basically the rationale is using the lightest one I can get away with to allow this bait to get down and maintain bottom contact. So a real good rule of thumb for me, very little current, 10 foot or shallower, no wind. I'm going to go with a 1/4 ounce Micro Football. Gets down fine, I can feel the bottom, I can fish it thoroughly. If I get in deeper water, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 feet, if I'm fishing in current, if I'm on the Susquehanna River, or in a reservoir that has a good flow, or if there's a lot of wind. Dude, if it's blowing 15 to 20, I step up to the 3/8. But the rule of thumb on these Micro Footballs is use the jig that's heavy enough to maintain bottom contact with the lightest weight you can get away with. All right, last but not least, guys, is the trailer. I want to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about the rod, the reel, and how we fish it. But on the trailer, little different selection than what you would fish on a traditional full-sized football jig. Remember, micro football jig, smaller, more compact, more finesse. And you want your trailers to fit that category, okay? So I've got 3 of them, guys, that I use, that I alternate between, really depending on the mood of the fish. And I'm going to start from the least active trailer for fish that it's really tough, up to the most active trailer when the fish are a little bit more active. So one of my favorite trailers to fish on a micro football is just a Ned bait, guys. The same exact Ned lure that you would use on a regular Ned head on a spinning rod is what I like to use on this micro football. This is a great example. We've got the 1/4 ounce missile micro football in peanut butter and jelly. This is a peanut butter and jelly Maxcent Little General, which is 2.75, almost 3 inches. And guys, I'm not even kidding you. I just thread it on. And what I'm left with is just what you would almost consider a Ned jig. A micro football jig with a Ned bait on the back. And when this thing comes along the bottom, it has no action except when you pause it, that skirt breathes and flares, right? In current, it does it a lot. But even when there's no current, I'm dragging this micro football jig, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And when I stop, skirt just breathes, okay? So crystal clear water, million dudes fishing, tough bite. I use a Ned bait on the back, just a regular Ned bait. You could also use like a 4-inch soft stick bait and thread that on there. It works just as good. All right, next trailer, guys, is something in the middle. So we're going from one extreme where the fish are not active at all to the fish are moderately active. I want something with a little kick in the tail. A little paddle tail bait is a good one. This has become my favorite. You may have heard me talk about this in other videos, but this is a bait by Berkley Power Bait called a water bug. And this is a 4-inch water bug, and I'll just take it and I'll just break it in half. You can almost just twist it, use a scissors, and when I do that, I thread it on this jig, and you get now a trailer, unlike that Ned bait, that has little kickers in the back. And I don't know if you can see that, but the water bug has just little flappers, okay? Again, as it comes along the bottom, now I have a little bit of movement in the back, and when I pause it, the skirt flares. The other nice thing about the water bug is it floats, so you get a little bit of that tail up position, which is really good for a crawfish imitation, okay? So moderate action bait for moderate action fish. And last but not least, I'm going to use a good old school crawl on the back, a kicker crawl on the back. But I want to make sure you know that I'm not using the same crawl that you would use for a full-size football jig. I'm not using a 4 or a 5-inch crawl. I'm using a micro crawl on a micro jig. This is the Berkley Power Bait Maxcent Little Trooper. It's 2.5 inches, so a 2 to 3 inch crawl. And last but not least, when you look at this one, it's got those kicker arms on the crawl. So it's got the most amount of action. So when the fish are juiced up and they're biting and they're more active, I love the crawl. And that's just the same thing. I just thread it on there, guys. And I got a really nice complement to that micro jig. Micro crawl on a micro jig, okay? All right, I want to switch over to rod, reel, and line. This is going to really surprise a lot of people, the way that I fish this micro football jig. And then we're going to talk about how to fish it. And the best part about micro football jig fishing is it's easy to fish. Okay. Rod, reel, and line. Guys, 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce. It's a finesse jig, but I fish it on a casting rod. Really, guys, it allows me to make long casts. It allows me to cover a lot of water, and it allows me to not be manhandled by the fish once I hook them, right? By using a casting rod on a micro football jig, I'm in control of those fish, unlike if it was a light, ultralight spinning rod, okay? So if you're a spinning rod guy only and you're watching it, absolutely you can use a spinning rod with this. But my choice for the micro jig, the 1/4 and 3/8 ounce size, is a 7 to 7.2 medium action casting rod, okay? Listen, the most important part of this video, besides my stole squeaking, is do not use a heavy action casting rod. Don't use a heavy action. Don't even use a medium heavy action. Use a medium action casting rod. This one is the 7-foot Abu Garcia Ike Series medium casting rod. And when you look at that, guys, it's got quite a bit of tip. So it's almost like having a spinning rod, but with the benefits of a casting rod, okay? So this is a 7-foot medium. On a reel, a lot of the finesse bait casting style reels are great. But, you know, just regular old spinning reel. This is the Revo SX. It's a great one for micro football jig fishing. The main thing is, guys, have a 7:1 gear ratio or higher. We don't want something ultra slow because a lot of bites on this micro football jig hit it and come at you. They think it's real, they eat it, and they come right at you, and you got to pick up a lot of line. So 7:1 or higher, low profile casting reel. And here's the last piece to this, guys. This is critical. This is not your full-sized football jig. It's not. So because of that, we're not using 15 or 17 or 20-pound fluorocarbon. We're going to use 10 or 12-pound fluorocarbon. If you get in real heavy cover and you're fishing the weed guard version, you can go up to 15. But most of the time I'm fishing this, I'm using 10 or 12. And I love 12. 100% Berkeley trilene fluorocarbon in 12. And that lighter fluorocarbon is going to let this smaller jig get down and stay down. And that's the key, okay? And it's also less obtrusive in the water, right? The fish respond to it better because it's not bulky, all right? All right. Last but not least, how we're going to fish that micro football. And it's a lot like dragging this full-size jig, a lot like that, except way more pauses. You really heard me talking about the pauses as I was telling you about the trailer. Guys, that's the key to the micro football jig, is a lot of pauses. So here's our typical cast, and really it's almost too easy to even explain it, but we're going to cast that micro football out where those fish are at. Again, ledges, humps, points, gravel bar, a rise, and anything where those fish are relating to. And we're going to let that jig fall to the bottom. When I let it fall, I still let it fall on a semi-slack line because every once in a while, one will eat it on the fall. But the juice on a micro football jig is fishing this bait on the bottom. 1/4 ounce, shallower water, no wind, right? 3/8 deeper water with wind, current, 3/8, right? But we want that bait to stay on the bottom. Remember what I said, look. Micro football jig has a micro football jig head. And dude, that thing is gonna that thing's going to army crawl along the bottom and not get caught, okay? So the jig's on the bottom. I'm going to take my rod from about 3 o'clock and I'm going to drag it, but I want to drag it in such a way that the jig is not lifting off the bottom, right? So a slow drag to maintain bottom contact. I'm going to drag and feel. If I don't feel anything, I'm going to stop. I'm going to reel back down to 3, and I'm going to start dragging again. Now listen to me. You ready? The moment that you're dragging that micro football and you feel it hit something, you feel it contact something, a rock, a boulder, an isolated stump, a sprig of coontail or cabbage, whatever. The minute that you're dragging it on the bottom and you feel it hit something, you ready? Stop! Stop the bait at that moment and just pause. If you're like me and you can't slow down, if you're like me and you're really hyper, a good rule of thumb is count to 10. It's really hard because 10 seconds seems like an eternity when you're nervous like me all the time. But when I hit something with that micro jig, I'm going to stop and I'm going to count to 10. And no matter what trailer you're using, if it's tough fishing and you're using the Ned, if it's okay normal fishing, you're using a little kicker tail, or if the fish are active and you're using that little crawl, when you stop, that bait will stay in place, and here it goes. You ready? Breathe. That skirt is going to breathe, right? And it's a big attractor to those fish. Let me see if I have a regular. I'll just grab it and I'll show you. So imagine a regular Ned. Here's a regular Ned rig. And you're dragging along and you stop and you hit a rock. When it stops, it stops. There's no more movement to that bait, right? If you're not moving it, it's not moving. On the micro football, the entire key to this bait is that when you hit something and stop, the skirt breathes and moves, even when you're not moving that bait. So you can imagine fishing clear water in a largemouth, a smallmouth, a spot, following it, and then it stops right near that rock or chunk rock. And all of a sudden that skirt starts breathing. Boom. That's the moment they inhale it. Okay? The pause, bottom contact, so critical in micro jig fishing. Guys, listen to me. If you fish a regular jig and you haven't tried this very compact, subtle mini version of it called a micro football jig, you are really, really missing out. Tough fishing, hot water, a lot of pressure, current, ultra clear water, smallmouth and spots, they go gaga over this bait. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this shop talking about a segment of jig fishing called micro football jigs. Everybody else doesn't want you to know. They're trying to keep it quiet. I'm here to tell you, this thing catches a lot of bass. Man, do me a favor. If you're watching this video, if you like what you hear, if you like what you're seeing, subscribe to the channel. Hit that subscribe button. See it? It's right there. Somewhere down there. Hit the subscribe button. Subscribe to my channel. If you do that, we're going to send you a notification on every single piece of content dropping. And that happens to be one a week. If you're already subscribed, tell your friends about Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. We're here to help you become a better angler and learn a few more tips about this awesome sport. So give it a try. Micro football jigs catch a lot of bass. Bye. Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli out in the shop. Thanks for watching. And if you like this video, you have to check out that one, and I hope you like them.